Hey everyone, Kyle Walker here. If you love cars, fixing things, or just want to understand your vehicle better, you're in the right place. I share hands-on tips, smart driving advice, and straight-up car talk without the fluff. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stick around till the end. You don't want to miss what's coming up. Let's get into it.
A lot of attention is paid to the repair and maintenance of various engine components. And very often in the discussion of all these issues sounds such a concept as the crankcase. But it turns out that not everyone knows the meaning of this element of the engine design. Many motorists cannot answer what it is and why it is used in cars. In fact, any vehicle equipped with an internal combustion engine is equipped with a crankcase. It is considered one of the main components of the powertrain, despite the fact that it is a fixed element. What it is? Often you can meet situations when the crankcase is called the engine trays, where all the lubricating oil for the motor, gearbox, etc. accumulates. But the crankcase is not really synonymous with the sump. It is correct to call the crankcase the lower part of the cylinder block if we speak in relation to the classic power units, and not to deal with radial, recumbent, opposition, and other not quite standard engines. The crankcase has a special cavity, which is designed to accommodate inside it an important and necessary crank mechanism, that is, the CMM. But the oil pan acts as a container for engine oil. It is directly related to the crankcase, because the sump is attached to it in the lower part. The crankcase has a conventional division into upper and lower parts. In the lower crankcase compartment, there is a fixed sump where the engine lubricant accumulates when the engine is not running. It is fair to call the crankcase the main element of the power unit housing. The internal space is insulated to create the most voluminous cavity in the engine. Inside the crankcase is the crankshaft, and the upper part serves to house the cylinder block. That is, in fact, the crankcase sump can be considered the housing of the internal combustion engine, which includes an oil pan. Location and purpose. Having understood what the crankcase is for the car, you can pay a little attention to the questions of its location and functional purpose. Let's start with where exactly the crankcases of powertrains are located. They are located in the same place as the engine itself, since they are its integral part. The crankcase acts as the space between the oil pan and the crankshaft of the engine. It is inside this space that the crank mechanism is located and carries out its movement. In fact, such an element as the engine sump carter is located in the engine. That is, the question of where it is located is not quite correct. Since in the crankcase there is a container located for collecting oil, sump, very often both elements are described by one concept. But in reality, the sump is an integral part of the construction in question. A bit of history. We owe the appearance of such an indispensable engine design element to an American engineer. It was in his honor that the part was named, because the specialist's name was Harrison Carter. The engineer realized his idea a long time ago. It happened in 1889. But the most interesting thing here is that initially Harrison's idea had absolutely nothing to do with automobile engines. Then he created a tank, which was filled with lubricant, purely for use on ordinary bicycles. By having a reservoir in which to store the lubricant, the bicycle chain was constantly in the lubricating fluid. This increased the efficiency and performance of the mechanism. And since the reservoir was closed, the reservoir, eventually called the crankcase, protected the bicycle chain from penetration of various contaminants, debris, and moisture. Already after a while, Carter's idea was borrowed by automobile engineers. This is how cars with a closed protective tank began to appear. Gradually, the design was improved and finalized. But the very idea and basis was taken from the protection for a bicycle chain. Such an original invention of its time left a huge mark on the entire automotive industry. Read also, what is a carburetor and how it works, device and materials used. Crankcases are usually classified according to their methods of installation on the cylinder block. But also do not forget about the differences in the device and materials used. Most often there are designs made on the basis of aluminum alloy and stainless steel. Extremely rarely, and rather on older cars, cast iron products are used. Although in the past cast iron was actively used in the production of automobile crankcases and pallets. But cast iron has lost its relevance. The reason is that the mass of the resulting structure is too high. Therefore, it was decided to switch to more lightweight alloy elements. The range of crankcases is not limited to metal alone. More and more often on modern cars, especially European production, plastic parts are installed. Only do not perceive such elements as extremely fragile and brittle, which is characteristic of ordinary plastic. Special polymer compositions are used for pallets, which are characterized by increased strength, resistance to high temperatures, and mechanical damage. But it is not recommended to operate machines with plastic crankcases in off-road conditions or on bad roads without additional protection. You will have to try hard to damage even a polymer sump. But there is still a chance. As for the device, there is nothing complicated. The appearance of the design is taken into account. On most vehicles, such an element as a sump carter is made in the form of a tank or container of rectangular shape of a relatively small size. Also, its color is often black. To provide additional protection for the car-installed crankcase, it is covered with sheets of metal or special impact-resistant plastic. It is such sheets that are called crankcase protection. In some designs of sump carter pallets, so-called stiffening ribs are provided. If they are present, they are located on its entire surface. Such ribs are designed to provide additional rigidity of the entire structure when the crankcase is assigned additional functions. Varieties. All crankcases used in automobiles can be divided into two categories depending on which power unit they are installed on. Therefore, it is customary to separately consider designs for two-stroke internal combustion engines, four-stroke power units. The difference in crankcase design is due to differences in the construction of the internal combustion engines themselves. The sump can be split or non-split. Often, the oil pan acts as a component of the crankcase, rather than simply collecting lubricating oil. Two-stroke engines. The peculiarity of F. Carter's invention for the two-stroke engine is that the crankcase and the motor are one and the same. It is an integral element of the body and one of the components of the power unit's power supply system. It is inside the crankcase that the process of preparing the fuel-air mixture takes place. The mixture then moves into the cylinders of the power unit. This is one of the differences in comparison with the four-stroke analog. Also, two-stroke motors are distinguished by the fact that here the oil is in direct contact with the fuel. When preparing the mixture for the cylinders, the crankcase allows to feed the engine, as well as to lubricate the elements of the cylinder piston group in parallel. Such a device of the system leads to the fact that inside the power unit mixes fuel and lubricating oil. This explains the increased smokiness and darker color of the smoke formed and exiting through the exhaust pipe. The exhaust is characterized by a bluish tint, which is a characteristic feature of motors on motorcycle equipment. This is where two-stroke motors continue to be used, unlike in cars. On two-stroke engines, spark plug life is significantly lower compared to its four-stroke competitor. Two-stroke engines are no longer practically found in automobiles and are also being abandoned by motorcycle manufacturers. Crankcase and four-stroke engine. In the case of four-stroke engines, the crankcase has a secondary or auxiliary role. Most often, the crankcase is only needed as an oil collection tank, nothing more. It is not difficult to explain such decision. Modern four-stroke engines do not welcome oil getting into the cylinders. Therefore, their exhaust has less smokiness and lighter color. The composition of the exhaust is cleaner and more environmentally friendly. Read also, punishment for false, counterfeit, or alien license plates on the car. Legislation and responsibility. An important component of the four-stroke in terms of cleaning the exhaust gases is the catalytic converter. Now it is installed on almost all modern cars with internal combustion engines. Features of dry crankcases. All of the above was directly related to cars on which a wet sump carter is used. This is the most common lubrication system used on civilian vehicles. But when it comes to crankcases, there is no such thing as a dry sump. Here, unlike traditional solutions, there is no lubricant in the sump. Dry systems are used mainly in the designs of racing cars, sports cars, and some off-road vehicles. To explain this decision of engineers is quite simple. When the car moves at high speed, sharply enters corners, quickly accelerates, and as actively brakes or climbs on hills, oil splashes all over the motor from one edge to the other. Because of these situations, there is a high probability that the oil pickup will become bare. At the same time, the lubricant itself, which is engine oil, foams. If this happens, the engine will face the problem of oil starvation. At the same time, the pressure in the system will drop. The result of such situations is first overheating of the engine, and later its complete failure with all the ensuing consequences. Dry sump carter is characterized by the fact that in the design of engines, there is a special reservoir. It serves to place all the lubricant. The reservoir is designed in such a way that churning becomes impossible, even under extreme conditions. And to ensure that each component can be lubricated and additionally cooled with oil, the liquid is supplied to them by a pump. During operation, the lubricant gradually drains into the oil pan. A suction module is provided so that the oil can be returned to the reservoir. It is this module that is responsible for taking the oil draining from the motor back into the reservoir. The pump then carries out its work again. The cyclic nature of this process ensures that all necessary elements are lubricated, but there are no disadvantages characteristic of the wet sump type. It is possible to distinguish several main advantages that characterize dry types of car sump crankcases. Such a problem as oil starvation is excluded. The crankcase itself has smaller geometric dimensions. The center of gravity of the engine is reduced. Oil is better cooled. The engine gets a slight increase in power because the lubrication resistance to the crankshaft is reduced. But at the same time, the use of a dry sump system results in a more complex design, making the engine more difficult to maintain and repair. Additionally, the total weight of the vehicle increases. All this leads to the fact that cars with dry crankcases, all other things being equal, are more expensive than classic solutions with wet crankcases. Largely because of these existing disadvantages and lack of necessity, dry systems are practically not used in civilian cars. There is no acute need for them. Wet crankcases perfectly fulfill their tasks. They are simpler to manufacture and easier to maintain. It is safe to say that the crankcase is not just an integral part of any engine operating on the principle of internal combustion of fuel-air mixture. It is also a very important component that performs its tasks to ensure reliable, uninterrupted, and trouble-free operation of the power plant. Structurally, these elements may differ slightly from each other, but the principle of their operation is approximately the same everywhere. The difference is only noticeable in the case of wet and dry crankcase systems. But since ordinary serial vehicles are very rarely equipped with a dry type, in the vast majority of cases we are talking about wet oil crankcases of vehicles. In conclusion, the crankcase plays a vital role in the overall function of an engine, serving as a protective housing for the crankshaft and other critical components. Its design not only ensures the efficient operation of the engine, but also contributes to its longevity. Understanding the materials used in crankcase construction, such as aluminum and cast iron, highlights the balance between strength and weight that engineers strive for. By appreciating the significance of the crankcase, we gain a deeper insight into the intricate workings of an engine and the engineering principles that keep our vehicles running smoothly. Thank you for watching, and we hope this video has enhanced your understanding of this essential engine component.